The glass hit the table before anyone spoke. Not shattered, just set down hard enough to make the silverware flinch. And in that half-second of silence, before the rest of the room decided whether to notice, I felt the shift. The kind of shift that tells you something in your life is about to be rearranged without your permission. We were at my daughter's engagement party. 62 guests, white tablecloths, candles that smelled like vanilla and money. My daughter Simone had planned every detail herself, because that's who she is. A woman who builds things with her own hands and trusts no one else to get the angles right. She'd turned 31 that spring, and the party was held in the private dining room of a restaurant downtown that she'd personally renovated 2 years ago as part of her real estate development firm. The same firm my late husband Raymond started in a rented office with nothing but a phone and a handshake. I was sitting at the head table, right where Simone had placed me. Not tucked in a corner, not off to the side. Center. Because my daughter understood something most people forget: a mother's seat is not a favor. It's a foundation. That's when Marcus leaned over. He didn't whisper. "That's the part I need you to understand." He didn't lower his voice or cup his hand around his mouth like a man hiding something shameful. He spoke clearly, casually, the way someone orders a drink they've had 100 times. "Lorraine," he said, using my first name like we were coworkers and not a man addressing the mother of the woman he claimed to love, "my family thinks it would be better if you took a less visible role at the wedding. You know, let the younger generation shine. We were thinking you could watch the live stream from the house." He smiled after he said it. A small, polished smile. The kind of smile men practice when they want cruelty to look like consideration. Around us, people laughed at something someone else had said. Forks scraped plates. Music played low enough to feel like background. Nobody heard him. That was the design. He chose his moment the way a pickpocket chooses a crowd surrounded by noise, so the theft goes unnoticed. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I kept my hands exactly where they were, one on my napkin, one resting near my glass of water, and I looked at him the way I've looked at men who underestimate me my entire life, with patience, because patience is what you use when you're deciding whether to respond or to remember. Marcus held my gaze for a beat, then leaned back in his chair, satisfied, like a man who'd just filed paperwork and expected no dispute. He reached for his wine, took a sip, and turned to laugh at something his mother said across the table. His mother, Diane. She was watching me. Not obviously, she was too trained for that. But I caught the flick of her eyes, the slight lift of her chin, the way her fingers tightened around her clutch purse like she was bracing for a reaction she'd already planned how to handle. His father, Gerald, didn't look at me at all. He was cutting his steak with the focus of a man who believed his silence was authority. I swallowed once, slow. Then I placed my napkin on the table and folded my hands in my lap. Not because I was surrendering, because I was making sure that when I moved, it would be on my terms. Simone was 3 seats away, talking to her business partner about a zoning issue. She hadn't heard, or so I thought. But mothers underestimate daughters sometimes. We assume they need to be told what happened. We forget they've been watching longer than we know. Simone's laughter stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes traveled to Marcus first, then to me. She didn't ask what happened. She read it. The way my posture had shifted. The way Marcus was suddenly too relaxed. The way his mother's smile had turned into something rehearsed. Simone set her drink down without looking at the table. Her jaw tightened once, quick, barely visible unless you raised her. Then she turned back to her conversation and kept talking. But I saw her hand drop beneath the table. I saw her fingers press flat against her thigh, the way she does when she's holding something back. Not weakness, decision. The party ended at 11. Marcus drove Simone home. I drove myself. The whole way back, I kept the radio off and the windows up and let the silence do what silence does when you've been insulted. It echoes until you stop pretending it didn't happen. My name is Lorraine Palmer. I raised my daughter alone after my husband died when she was 19. He left us a company that was worth something because he'd bled into it for 23 years, and when he passed, the building didn't stop needing someone at the wheel. Simone stepped in before the funeral flowers had wilted, not because she wanted to, because she had to. And in the 12 years since, she turned a mid-sized development firm into one of the most respected names in commercial real estate in Charlotte. She did that carrying grief in one hand and blueprints in the other. Marcus came into her life 18 months ago through a mutual friend at a fundraiser. He was charming in the way that works on tired women, attentive without being aggressive, funny without trying too hard, interested in her work without being threatened by it. At least that's how it looked. He told her he was in consulting, independent, between projects. The kind of language that sounds like ambition but sometimes just means a man is standing in the gap between what he wants and what he's willing to build for himself. Simone didn't question it because Simone doesn't interrogate people she cares about. She offers space and watches how they fill it. Marcus filled it quickly. Within 3 months, he'd moved into the house Raymond built for us, the house I still had a room in because Simone insisted I stay after my hip surgery 2 years ago and then never asked me to leave. Not out of obligation. Out of love. The kind of love that says, your presence is not a burden. Your presence is the walls. Marcus was polite to me at first. He'd ask if I needed anything from the store. He'd hold the door. He'd call me Mrs. Palmer with a warmth that felt close enough to genuine. But I've lived long enough to know the difference between respect and audition. Some men perform manners the way they perform interest, just long enough to secure the position. The signs were small. He began answering Simone's business calls when she was in the shower, not to help to insert himself. I'd hear him say things like, "I'll pass that along," or "We're handling it," and that word "we" landed in my ears like a stone in still water. There was no we, there was Simone. And then there was a man standing close enough to the wheel to make people think he had his hands on it. He stopped closing cabinets gently. He started parking in Raymond's old spot in the driveway. He began referring to the house as ours in conversations with friends who visited, and nobody corrected him because nobody wanted to embarrass Simone. But the moment I knew something deeper was wrong was when I overheard him on the phone in the hallway, voice low, almost bored. "She doesn't need to be in every conversation," he said. "She's her mother, not her partner. There's a difference." He was talking about me. The morning after the engagement party, I found Simone in the kitchen before sunrise. She was standing at the counter with her coffee untouched, staring at the wall the way her father used to, when something at work had gone sideways and he was rebuilding the plan inside his head before anyone else woke up. She didn't turn when I walked in, but she knew I was there. "He said something to you last night," she said. Not a question. I pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. My hip ached, but I didn't reach for it. "Yes," I said. "What?" I told her. Every word, the live stream, the less visible role, the smile afterward. I told her calmly because calmness is the only language that doesn't get twisted later. Simone's fingers tightened around the mug she hadn't lifted yet. She didn't gasp. She didn't slam it down. She just stood very still, the way steel holds before it bends or before it decides not to. "He said that to you at my party," she repeated quietly. "At a table I set, in a room I built." I nodded. Simone turned to face me then, and the look in her eyes wasn't anger. Anger is fast. What I saw was something slower and more dangerous. Clarity, the kind that doesn't burn, it cuts. "How long has he been making you feel like this?" she asked softly. My throat tightened, because that question wasn't about the party, it was about the months of small reductions I'd swallowed to keep her happiness intact. "A while," I admitted. Simone closed her eyes for one breath. When she opened them, they were dry and focused. "I need you to tell me everything," she said, "not to protect me, so I can see what I missed." So I told her. The phone calls he answered in her name. The way he said "we" about the company. The comment about me not needing to be in every conversation. The slow, quiet way he'd been walking through our home like he was measuring it for new furniture. Simone listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set her coffee down and said something that made my chest ache. "I made you smaller to keep him comfortable." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Every time you corrected him, and I smoothed it over. Every time I said, 'Mama, it's fine,' when it wasn't fine. I was teaching him that you were negotiable." I reached for her hand across the counter. "You were trying to keep peace," I said. Simone shook her head once. "Peace isn't peace if someone has to disappear for it to work." She didn't cry. She sat with me for another minute, then stood up, pulled her hair back, and said, "I need to check something at the office." She left the house in work clothes with her jaw set, and I knew the way mothers know things they can't explain, that she wasn't going to check on a building, she was going to check on a man. The next 3 days were quiet in a way that made me nervous. Simone came home each evening at her normal time. She spoke to Marcus pleasantly. She discussed wedding details with his mother on the phone without tension. She kissed him goodnight and closed the bedroom door behind them like everything was ordinary. But I saw her taking her laptop into the guest office after Marcus fell asleep. I heard the soft click of keys past midnight. I noticed the way she looked at him over breakfast, not with love, not with anger, but with the focus of someone reading a contract for hidden clauses. On the 4th morning, she came to my room early, door already closed behind her, folder in her hand. "Sit down, Mama," she said. I sat on the edge of my bed and watched her open the folder on the dresser. Inside were printed emails, calendar screenshots, and a document I didn't recognize. After the engagement, she began, voice-controlled. Marcus started reaching out to contractors and vendors we work with, not through our office, through his personal email, using his name alongside the company name. My stomach turned. He scheduled meetings for January 3 weeks after the wedding date with 2 of our biggest partners. Subject lines like leadership transition and new point of contact. I stared at the papers. The words swam for a second before coming into focus. He told one of them, Simone continued, tapping a printed email, that after the wedding, he'd be overseeing day-to-day operations so I could focus on the family side. Family side, like my daughter's career was a hobby she'd set down once a ring was on her finger. "There's more," Simone said. She slid a second page toward me. "He drafted something. It's not official. It's not filed, but it reads like a restructuring plan." I looked at the bullet points. Streamline executive decision-making. Consolidate vendor relationships under single leadership. Reduce redundant oversight. Redundant oversight. That meant Simone, the woman who built the oversight, the woman who was the oversight. At the bottom, one line made my blood go cold. Post-merger family integration will allow seamless transition without disruption. Merger. He called their marriage a merger. I looked up at Simone. Her eyes were steady, but I could see the war behind them, the woman who'd loved this man sitting across from the CEO who now understood what he was. "He hasn't stolen anything," she said, as if she needed to be precise. "He hasn't touched accounts. He hasn't forged signatures. But he's been speaking like a man who already owns what doesn't belong to him." I felt dizzy, not from shock, from recognition, because Raymond's brother had tried something similar 20 years ago. Different methods, same assumption. That closeness equals access. That family means you stop locking doors. "The wedding," I whispered. Simone's mouth tightened. "The wedding was never just a wedding to them," she said. "It was the closing date." That sentence broke something open in the room. Not between us, between Simone and the version of her life she'd been building with Marcus in it. She closed the folder slowly. "I'm meeting with our attorney this afternoon," she said. "Not to sue him, to protect what Dad left us." She looked at me, and for 1 second, the CEO disappeared, and I saw my daughter exhausted, wounded, carrying the weight of a betrayal she hadn't asked for. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," she said. I stood up and held her face in both my hands the way I did when she was small and the world had scratched her. "You saw it in time," I told her. "That's what matters." The next week moved with surgical precision. Simone didn't confront Marcus with accusations. She didn't throw papers across the table and demand explanations. She did what her father taught her. She closed every door before the man inside realized the room had changed. She revoked his access to company systems on a Tuesday morning while he was at the gym. She informed key partners that Marcus had no authority to represent the firm and never had. She filed the paperwork with her attorney, confirming that the company assets were solely hers, premarital, untouchable. Marcus didn't notice for 2 days. That's how sure he was. He walked through the house with the same comfortable stride, kissed Simone on the forehead, asked me if I wanted anything from the store. He had no idea the ground beneath him had already been pulled. On Thursday evening, Simone came home, set her bag down, and stood in the living room where Marcus was watching a game on the television Raymond had picked out 3 years before he died. "We need to talk," she said. Marcus looked up. smiling. "Sure, babe. What's up?" Simone didn't sit. She placed a single folder on the coffee table between them and said, "Your involvement with my company is over. Your access has been removed. This paperwork outlines the separation." Marcus's smile stayed frozen on his face for a full 3 seconds. Then it cracked. "What are you talking about?" He laughed, but the sound was hollow. Simone's voice didn't rise. "You scheduled meetings with my partners using titles you don't have. You drafted a restructuring plan for a company you don't own. You presented yourself as incoming leadership to people who report to me." Marcus stood up. The TV kept playing behind him, crowd noise filling the silence he couldn't. I was trying to help," he stammered. "I was trying to show initiative." Simone's gaze didn't waver. "Initiative doesn't require deception." Marcus's eyes darted to me. Sharp, resentful, like I was the one who'd whispered in her ear and turned her against him. "This is because of her, isn't it?" he said, pointing at me with the casual cruelty of a man looking for someone to blame. "She's been in your ear since day one." Simone stepped between his gesture and me, not dramatically, just enough to make the boundary physical. "Don't look at my mother like that," she said quietly. "She didn't do this. You did. The night you tapped her shoulder and told her she could watch her own daughter's wedding from a screen, you told me exactly who you are." Marcus's jaw worked, his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, I thought he might yell. Instead, he did something worse. He tried to negotiate. "Simone, let's slow down," he said, voice shifting to that low, soothing tone men use when they think softness will buy them time. "I love you. We can work through this. Couples disagree about business all the time." Simone shook her head once. "This isn't a disagreement. This is a discovery." "So what? We're done? You're calling off the wedding over emails?" Simone's voice came quiet and final. "I'm calling off the wedding because you married the company in your mind before you ever married me." Marcus stared at her. I watched the arrogance drain from his face in real time, replaced by something raw, not remorse, but the panic of a man realizing the door is locked and the key isn't in his pocket. "You'll regret this," he said, and the words came out thin. Simone didn't respond. She turned and walked into her office and closed the door with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. Marcus stood in the living room alone. The TV still played. The candles from the engagement party were still on the mantel, unlit, decorative, useless now. He looked at me once, and I saw it in his eyes, not guilt, but calculation collapsing. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My presence in that room was enough, because that was exactly what he'd tried to remove the witness. The woman who would remember. The mother whose eyes would keep his mask from fitting. The calls from his parents came the next morning. Diane first, voice high and sweet, then cracking. "Simone, sweetheart, this is a misunderstanding. You can't just cancel everything. People are expecting the deposits, the venue." Simone let her finish. Then she said, "The venue has been released. The deposits are handled. There's nothing left to discuss." Gerald took the phone. "You're being emotional," he said, and I could hear him reaching for the authority he believed his age gave him. "A man makes a few business calls and you blow up a whole future?" Simone's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "He didn't make business calls. He impersonated leadership of a company that isn't his, and your family's discomfort doesn't change the facts. We've invested in this wedding." Diane cut back in, sharper now, the sweetness gone. "Then you should have invested in raising a son who respects the woman he claims to love and her mother," Simone replied. Silence on the line. The kind of silence that follows truth no one can argue with. "This conversation is over," Simone said. She hung up and didn't call back. Marcus packed his things on a Saturday. He moved through the house slowly, like a man memorizing rooms he believed should have been his. He folded shirts. He boxed shoes. He paused at the hallway where family photos hung, Raymond holding baby Simone, me at my college graduation, Simone cutting the ribbon at her first building, and he looked at them the way people look at things they tried to own but never earned. He stopped at the front door with a suitcase in each hand and turned back one last time. "She'll call me," he said, more to himself than to me. I stood in the hallway, hands at my sides, spine straight, and said the only thing I needed to say. "She won't." He left. The door closed behind him, and the house exhaled. In the weeks that followed, the silence wasn't empty. It was clean. Simone didn't mourn publicly. She didn't post anything online. She didn't give anyone a story to twist or a scene to gossip about. She just returned to work with a focus that reminded me of Raymond in his best years, steady, deliberate building. One evening, she came home with a frame tucked under her arm. Inside was a photograph I hadn't seen in years, Raymond, standing outside the first office building he ever purchased, grinning like a man who'd just told the world what he was capable of, and the world had finally listened. "I want this in the lobby at headquarters," she said. I touched the glass gently. "He'd be proud of you," I whispered. Simone's eyes softened for a moment. "I let someone get close enough to try," she said. "But I didn't let him stay." She set the frame on the counter and looked at me with clear eyes. "You know what the hardest part was?" she asked. I shook my head, realizing that the night he told you to watch from a screen, he wasn't just disrespecting you. He was rehearsing. He was testing whether this family would let him rearrange it. She reached across and squeezed my hand. "You are not negotiable, Mama. Not at any table. Not at any wedding. Not in any room I build." I squeezed back and held on because some sentences don't need a response, they just need to be received. That Sunday morning, the house smelled like coffee and quiet and something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from being alone, the kind that comes from being chosen by the people who matter. Simone sat across from me at the kitchen table, sunlight through the window. No folders, no phones, just us. "We learn," I said softly. She nodded. "We learn." Then she stood up, kissed my forehead, and walked through the house with her shoulders back and her eyes clear, a woman who would never again mistake silence for peace or a man's comfort for love. And that's the truth I want to leave you with. Wherever you're watching from today, a man who asks you to disappear isn't protecting a wedding. He's protecting a plan. And a daughter who stands up and says no, not with screaming, not with tears, but with calm, unshakable certainty, that daughter isn't being difficult. She's being her mother's child. If you've ever sat at a table where someone tried to make you invisible, tell me where you're watching from. Your city? Your country? I want to know how many women understand what that silence costs, and what it means when someone finally breaks it for you.